Hey, Retcon Raider here, and welcome to what we'll call the Q4 2021 Retrospective. Really, Ellie? Right now? Alright, hi baby, come on. Alright, let's start this again. Hey, Retcon Raider here, with Ellie in tow. And welcome to what we'll call the Q4 2021 Retrospective. Because at this point, I've pretty much settled on just making these things quarterly. Alright, Ellie, I need you to sit down, please. Like I said last time around, we're just getting to the point where the more granular monthly or bi-monthly updates don't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, we're actually really close to the channel's 5-year anniversary, which is just surreal to me, as it always doesn't feel like it's been that long. But yeah, we're coming up on 5 years next April. This is my 42nd retrospective, and at this point, I feel like most folks have a pretty good idea of how the channel's gains tend to ebb and flow. In this case, we hit a big spike just as we were starting the new ongoing Wrath series back in September. And now we've settled pretty solidly into the classic Q4 holiday slump. Numbers are a little lower than usual. Not to mention, of course, we've been hovering just below 2,100 subscribers for a while now. But that should change as we get into the new year and start hitting big new titles. Not much else to really say there. I suppose that is kind of glossing over the recent YouTube controversy. Yet another one. In this case, it's the questionable decision to conceal the dislike count on videos. Honestly, though, as far as YouTube controversies go, I'm not really all that invested in this one. Not because I think it's a good idea, because it's absolutely not. But more because, as a YouTube creator, an amateur YouTube creator, I have long since realized that the whole dislike thing was largely just a placebo to begin with. I mean, I'm sure most of you have already heard this before, but hitting the dislike button on a video doesn't actually hurt it. Quite the opposite, in fact, because YouTube just counts that as engagement, just like liking, commenting, or even subscribing. Dislikes add extra weight to a video in the YouTube search and recommendation algorithms, making those videos more likely to be recommended, and more likely to get that delicious ad revenue when curious viewers click on the video that just popped up in their feed. It's why you see some creators deliberately spamming comments everywhere trying to bait people into coming to their channel just to dislike their videos. Those dislikes are actually fueling their channel and helping them make more money, essentially rewarding them for their bad behavior. It's the same with any monetized video that ends up getting targeted by dislike campaigns, or deliberately lures people in with clickbait titles or thumbnails. That's not to say that every content creator who makes a heavily disliked video sets out to deliberately exploit that flawed system, but there are definitely some folks who do. And what it ultimately comes down to is that hitting the dislike button may grant a viewer a brief moment of cathartic satisfaction, the sensation or impression that you're punishing someone for their poor content or their poor conduct. But in actuality, you are ultimately promoting their behavior or conduct or poor content because you're essentially rewarding them for their behavior. So yeah, I'm not really all that invested in the current drama surrounding what is the effective removal of dislikes. I still don't think it's a good idea. I think that we should have some sort of actual reliable review system in place for video content. But the way they had them previously implemented wasn't a good idea either. If anything, this is actually a very marginal improvement to what was already a deeply flawed mechanic. Anyway, since we're already in the muck, flailing around in a vat full of unpleasant topics, I might as well touch on the whole exploding tooth thing. You may have already heard about this if you follow me on social media, which if you do, why? But even if you don't, you may have noticed that my videos have become a bit more sporadic lately, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being that I'm making much longer videos lately, which does naturally lead to less frequent uploads. Same general amount of content, just parceled out differently. But another prominent contributing factor, however, is that back in October, my upper left premolar basically exploded. It actually didn't hurt. That makes it sound a lot more dramatic than it really was. But it was definitely one of those things where you probably want to get it taken care of sooner rather than later. So, long story short, it turns out that over the past couple of years, I've apparently taken to grinding or clenching my teeth at night, possibly due to undiagnosed sleep apnea, but I'll worry about that later. It is something that I theoretically would have found out about earlier, if not for the fact that I had basically just stopped going to the dentist after my old one got eaten by current events back in 2019. I mean, look, I don't like people sticking their hands in my mouth in even the best of times, let alone during current events. So finding a new dentist just has not been high on my list of priorities, especially not after my employer got eaten by current events last year. You know, that kind of gave me some other things to worry about. So yeah, it turned out that grinding my teeth for a year plus had done some pretty significant damage. I managed to crack 5 teeth, 6 now, but the premolar was the first one that got so bad that it finally just exploded. I've been working on getting them spackled up since then. It's just an ongoing and occasionally intense process. It hasn't actually made things as awkward as I feared it might, aside from the occasional headaches or mouthful of blood, but I will say there are times when I'm just not in the mood to talk, you know, especially after nightmare procedures like tooth shaping or gum line trimming. That said, those words should never go together. It is what it is. You know, it's just another problem. It needs to be dealt with. So I am dealing with it. Moving on. Now, nightmare teeth aside, I would like to note that I will be shifting my production style a little as we go into the new year. I like to change things up a little every time we get into a new year. So in this case, I think the overall runtime on the individual episodes has gotten a bit out of hand, so we're going to make a more concerted effort to rein that back. The actual YouTube ideal for video length right now is about 30 minutes, and lately I've been averaging upwards of 75 plus. That's not to say I'm going to yank it back too dramatically, but recent polls have indicated that most viewers generally prefer something in the 45 to 60 minute range, which suits me just fine. It's basically what I was doing anyway before I started getting too carried away with Wrath, so we'll just try to see if we can kind of settle back into that. Speaking of Wrath, you know what, I've already spent more time yammering about serious subjects than I wanted to, so let me just scratch these off my list. And let's jump over to something a little more fun to talk about. Yeah, let's talk about Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, and to a lesser extent Wasteland 3, which I've got right below that, are 2 current ongoing series. Now, I already mentioned that the Wrath series got off to a pretty solid start back in September, and it has tapered off a bit since then, but that's pretty standard, and it's still getting pretty decent numbers per episode. We just finished up Act 1 earlier this month, and we will be jumping into Act 2 next week. As aforementioned, I will be trying to keep the episode lengths down a little in that 45 to 60 minute range, but I'll also start trimming the episodes a little more aggressively, just to cut out some of the filler content. For example, I'll probably slim down the leveling segments, just focus on Vex's level ups, and kind of put the rest of the party on autopilot. And I'll also trim out any of the random encounters that just don't feel like they're all that interesting. I'm not planning on trimming out any dialogue, since that is of course one of the big draws to this game for me, but I would like the episodes to be a little more densely packed with story, lore, and, you know, actual adventuring. So I'll be fine-tuning the balance as we settle back in. As for Wasteland 3... Bye, Ellie. Wasteland 3, yes. We just wrapped up the Steeltown X-Pack, and we will be jumping into the Cult of Holy Detonation. Hello, Layla. Hold on. Okay, as for Wasteland 3, we just wrapped up the Steeltown X-Pack, and we will be jumping into the Cult of Holy Detonation. as we get out towards the new year. I've been told that the Cult DLC is a little shorter than Steeltown. Basically, one big sort of glorified post-apocalyptic dungeon crawl. So I'm guessing we'll wrap that series in another 8 or 10 episodes. Then again, I was told that Steeltown was only going to be like 5 hours long, and that obviously was not the case. So, I guess we'll really just play that one by ear. Either way, I figure we'll be officially wrapping the extended Wasteland 3 series by, let's say, mid-January, maybe a little later. Oh, and I will say that the numbers on Wasteland 3 have been all over the place since I relaunched it. Some episodes have gotten a boatload of views, for reasons, and others have barely gotten any. The recent trend has put the series low enough in the rankings that it's officially in the danger zone as far as my ongoing series go. But I wouldn't worry too much about that, because I think it's pretty safe to say that I'm not going to stop until we're finished with it at this point. I mean, I'm still enjoying it, and we're almost at the end anyway, so I might as well see it all the way through. While I certainly wouldn't mind getting more ad revenue on each of the individual episodes, it's also actually not that big a deal thanks to the fine folks who help support the channel through PayPal or Patreon. You know, the Raiders. That really does take a lot of the pressure off me as an amateur content creator, because I don't feel as anxious when one of my projects is underperforming or not doing quite as well as I would like it to. That's not to say that I don't care about the average rank-and-file viewers. It's more just to say that it allows me to focus on games that I'm really enjoying and that I think the Raiders will enjoy, without having to chase whatever big new project I think will get the most views. In fact, on a similar note, Scarlet Hollow. That was a fun little experiment I ran back in August, and while it certainly wasn't my most successful short-run series, it did get some decent traction, about on par with my Wrath stuff. More notably, though, it really seemed to resonate with a bunch of the Raiders, and has maintained a pretty solid death grip on the second place slot in my last few monthly interest polls. I'm glad to see that so many people ended up liking it, since of course I only really did it on a lark because I liked it. And I'm definitely looking forward to jumping into Chapter 3, which should be dropping around February. I'm guessing it'll clock in at about 3 hours of additional material for us to explore, which I'll probably try to chop into slightly smaller chunks this time around. I'd say 3, maybe 4 episodes. I have to say, that is actually one of the things I'm most looking forward to as we head into the first quarter of 2022. I actually enjoyed doing that series so much that I've started poking around, looking for any other similar games that we might putter around with in the future. Sadly, I haven't seen anything that's quite hooked me the same way as Scarlet Hollow did, but I've gotten some interesting recommendations for stuff like 80 Days, Kentucky Route Zero, the upcoming remaster for Life is Strange, and even a couple of World of Darkness visual novels, and I do like the World of Darkness. I mean, the shelf full of World of Darkness books right behind me would probably indicate that. Slightly more in my wheelhouse, I do have a few other interesting games that I'm also eyeing or looking forward to. Games like Colony Ship, Cyberknight's Flashpoint, and Expeditions Rome. We've talked about all 3 of these to some degree in the past retros, but yeah, those are all big ones that I'm eyeing for more potential video stuff as we head into Q1 and Q2 of next year. Of the 3, Cyberknights is probably the one I'm most excited for. That should be hitting a backer alpha in January, followed by a Steam Early Access launch sometime in Q3. Not sure exactly when I'll end up doing something with it. Likely not until that EA launch half a year out from now, but I think that'll make a great sort of casual, semi-narrative strategy series. This sort where I can start up a waiting list and recruit raiders and rank-and-file viewers into my gang of cybered-up scoundrels as we take to the streets of New Boston. I am very much looking forward to that. As for Colony Ship, that one's in a slightly trickier position, because that's another text-heavy, story-driven CRPG, and I'd kind of like to avoid having those running parallel to each other again. I am really excited to run that series at some point, though, but as I mentioned last time round, I'm hesitant to do so while it's still in early access. The beta is really impressive. It's well crafted, the setting is absolutely fascinating, but I kind of don't want to spoil it by jumping into it while the story is still unfinished, especially when every other big new content drop breaks your older save files. So in short there, I think I do plan on jumping on it at some point, but it might be later rather than sooner. As for Expeditions Rome, that one's a bit of a wild card. I actually wasn't really planning on doing anything with it, not because I think it looks bad, because it doesn't, but more just because I've never really been all that personally invested in ancient Rome. When it comes to historic settings, I tend to have a good bit more interest in, let's say, the Age of Exploration and upward, pirates, Western Frontier, pulp adventure, noir. And I'm a big fan of mixing things up with alternate histories, anachronistic or fantasy elements on otherwise familiar settings. That said, the Raiders have shown some exceptional interest in Expeditions Rome, so I'll definitely check it out when it drops. It does look good. It's the highest budget and most ambitious of the 3 Expeditions games thus far. It's actually got full voice acting. It's much more story-driven than the last 2, I think. And it's going to have some sort of invasion system to help simulate the Roman legion's war against the Greek uprising. So, that is intriguing. There are no guarantees that I'll actually end up making videos about it, of course. After recent disappointments like Empire of Sin and Necromunda, I'd really rather get my hands on a game and play it, put it through its paces before I commit to doing any videos. But it is medium high on my priority list, so I'll definitely give that one a look. Beyond that, I've also been eyeing a couple of older games for potential video projects. Right off the bat, I'll say that Stygian is still very much on my list. That game is exceptionally short, and we were already halfway through it when I hit the pause button. I'd really like to get back to it someday, just so we can wrap it up. Granted, the game didn't end up living up to its full potential. Sadly, the developers just didn't have the budget or resources to see it all the way through. But I still really like it for what it tried to do, and what's there is not bad. I will say, I'm not sure if I can still go as hard on the voices as I did back in 2017 and 2018. I've worn my throat down a bit since then, but I would still absolutely love to dust off our ill-fated occult investigator. Not exactly a high-priority project, but one that's always kicking around in the back of my brain. We will finish it someday. It is inevitable. But perhaps slightly more likely, though, are games like the Shadowrun trilogy from Harebrained Schemes, or Wildermyth. Shadowrun's an interesting case, because I actually did back Returns in Hong Kong. I would have backed Dragonfall too, but I don't think that one got a crowdfunding campaign. It was, I believe it was funded off the success of Shadowrun Returns. But despite backing the games and absolutely loving the crap out of the entire Shadowrun setting, seriously, I own almost every single book, novel, and accessory up to 3rd edition. I never really thought about doing any videos about the CRPGs. All 3 of those games predated the channel, and we've had no shortage of newer games to focus on since then. I would definitely love to touch on them in the future, when we're not preoccupied with other, newer, higher priority projects. Not sure we'd end up doing all 3 of them, but they are all reasonably short and self-contained. If nothing else, I'd at least love to do a series about Dragonfall. That one was easily my favorite out of the 3. Of course, Wildermyth is much more likely to get some airtime before Stygian or Shadowrun ever do. I'm sure I've said it before, and I'll definitely say it again, but I absolutely love Wildermyth. I did a super casual short-run series about it a couple of years back, when it was still in beta, but now the game has hit full launch and it's got a boatload of new content, so I'd really like to take a proper look at it. It's another one of those games where I can start up a waiting list full of willing cannon fodder recruits drawn from the raiders and rank-and-file viewers. You know, just to add that extra personal touch and a little extra pathos and drama when I inadvertently get someone killed. It also helps that Wildermyth is one of those games that's just very well suited to the short-run format. Every story is broken up into chapters, with each chapter running maybe 3 to 5 episodes worth of content. That's ideal for filling gaps between bigger projects, or just puttering around with when I need a break from something that's more exhausting, like these story-driven epics that we've been getting into lately. We will do Wildermyth at some point. It's just a matter of finding a good time. At any rate, I think that's all the games that are particularly high priority on my lists right now. But, as usual, I figured we'd pad things out with another Retcon Radar segment. I've got a list of about 20 games I'm currently watching that we've never talked about before. But we've run a little long already, so, you know what, I'm just going to... Yeah, I'll pick a few highlights and save the rest for next time. Let me see here. Okay, here's one. Let's start with Above Snakes by Tobias Schnackenberg. Schnackenberg? This is an interesting one because when I first added it to my watch list, I actually mistakenly assumed it was a turn-based strategy game. I had only glanced at it, and the interesting tile-based world map system, originally hexes but now squares, caused me to jump to an incorrect conclusion. Despite that, though, even after realizing my mistake, I've still kept it on my watch list because it does look fascinating. It's essentially a real-time isometric roguelite survival crafting game with zombies. The nearest thing I think I can accurately compare it to is probably Project Zomboid, but with a frontier western setting and a tile-based world map. It's not really the sort of game that I would normally make videos about, but it is very much the sort of game that I would just play for fun while I'm trying to relax. It's still pretty early in development, but already looking pretty good. Tobias has a Kickstarter campaign planned for next month to help secure further funding to continue development. So I would definitely suggest checking that out if you think it looks good. I will almost certainly end up backing it myself. After that, we've got... Well, we already brought up Kickstarter, so let's go with Deck RX by Meteor Byte Studios. Another oddball indie game that just had a successful Kickstarter campaign. Again, one that I was happy to back. Much like Above Snakes, it's an unconventional mashup of genres and mechanics, something which I've become increasingly fond of over the past few years. In this case, Deck RX is a turn-based roguelike deck builder where you use card mechanics to simulate combat racing. The quirky setting and character designs definitely have a very F-Zero or Rock and Roll Racing feel to them. Does anyone remember that game? Those are both games that I personally enjoyed when I was growing up. It's very much a low-budget game, but I do find the concept intriguing and the visuals charming. That aside, while it doesn't come up much, I really do want to just see more turn-based car combat games. I was a huge fan of games like Auto Duel and Car Wars when I was growing up, or even Gorka Morka, as weird and niche as that one is. I think it's an absolute travesty that there are no faithful turn-based video game adaptations of those sorts of vehicular tabletop classics. Game devs just seem to have a really hard time wrapping their heads around the idea of a car game that uses a turn-based tactical combat system. Of course, Deck RX obviously doesn't come even close to being as complex as any of those games, even Gorka Morka, which was pretty abstract. But it's definitely in the same general wheelhouse. There's a prototype demo up on Steam, so be sure to go check that out if you think it sounds cool. And full launch is slated for late next year. Next we've got you know what? Let's touch on Marvel's Midnight Suns real quick. That is the big new XCOM-like that we're getting from Firaxis, instead of an actual new XCOM game. Yay? This is a tough one because I want to be more excited for this one, but I'm just having a hard time doing it. I mean, I do like the idea of a turn-based tactical supers game, and I absolutely love American comics, or at least I did right up until about 2012, 2013, when they did the latest round of cosmic reboots. It's just that comics and video game adaptations don't really have a great track record. And I feel like they're immediately starting off on the wrong foot by stacking the team with a bunch of A-listers who were never actually in the Midnight Suns. I mean, with folks like Iron Man and Wolverine and Captain America, they might as well just call it the New Avengers. And also some of the Midnight Suns showed up. I feel like the second you start tossing those sorts of A-list comic heroes into anything, the vast majority of any actual tension or suspense goes out the window. I'm also a little worried that this will just end up being stuffed full of loot boxes or microtransactions or some flavor of exclusive content. I'm just waiting for the announcement that only PlayStation will get to use Gold Suit Spider-Man or something. Or Scarlet Spider. I mean, I guess Sony would have the rights to him, and he was actually in the Midnight Suns for like 20 seconds. All that stuff just kind of saps away at the excitement or anticipation I want to feel for this game. But for now, I'm just keeping my enthusiasm in neutral until I can actually get my hands on it. Who knows, maybe it will be a fantastic game and I'll really enjoy playing it, and I'll do a bunch of videos on it. We'll see. You know, and this is a bit of a tangent, but what I would actually love to see is something akin to an XCOM-like based on the Suicide Squad or Thunderbolts franchise. When I used to read comics more regularly, I tended to latch on to the random expendable C or D listers, because those were the guys you never knew exactly what the writers were going to do with. A-listers would almost always end up just going back to the status quo after a couple of months or years. C and D-listers, on the other hand, were much, much more expendable. They were often used as fodder for shock events, maimed or killed for the sake of maintaining some degree of danger or severity in a story where the actual main heroes, the title characters, were never going to die. Not for real, anyway. I mean, it's never going to happen, of course. The licensing costs for even just a few dozen or 100 D-listers would be pretty prohibitive. Not to mention, of course, the broad public appeal would be pretty limited. It'd pretty much just be weirdos like me. But it is the sort of game that I like to imagine sometimes, especially when I go back and reread classic comic runs like the original John Ostrander Suicide Squad run, or the old Marvel Exiles series by Judd Winnick. That had a huge body count. Even Robert Kirkman's Invincible series, which I'm a big fan of, and has become a whole lot more popular these days with the new Amazon animated adaptation. That is a great example of a series where most supers are still very mortal, and you never know which characters would end up surviving a story arc. Anyway, back on video games. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Jagged Alliance 3 from Haemimont Games and THQ Nordic. I suppose I should at least give a token mention to that one. I don't really have high hopes for it, just because there have been so many other lackluster or outright failed attempts to revive the franchise, but I'm also not just going to dismiss it out of hand. I want this to be a good game, and the early mock-up screenshots do have me cautiously optimistic. That said, the developers on this one are... Well, I don't want this to sound mean, but they're not exactly known for making gritty, granular, squad-based, turn-based tactical games like Jagged Alliance. They're probably best known for making the Tropico series, or other games like Surviving Mars, Victor Vran. They also made Omerta City of Gangsters, which is probably the closest thing to Jagged Alliance in their portfolio, and that game was pretty middle of the road. It was very early on, though, so I'm sure they've come a long way since then. Still, despite their lack of experience in the very specific and demanding niche that Jagged Alliance sits in, they are an enduring and reasonably well-respected studio. I'm curious to see what they'll end up cranking out. No ETA on that one. We'll just have to wait for more news. Next, we've got Sovereign Syndicate by Crimson Herring Studios. This one's a story-driven isometric CRPG set in a steampunk version of Victorian London. And it's got some strong Arcanum vibes to it. It's apparently being designed as a largely story-driven experience with a learn-by-doing skill system and a tarot-based RNG system, instead of conventional dice-based mechanics. I really like the look of this one, though I will note that it is a game where you don't get to make your own character. Instead, you have to choose from a list of 3 pre-mades, each with their own special skills and unique but overlapping stories to explore. That's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if those stories are well written and fit together to create a much greater overarching story. But I do have an easier time getting invested when I get to make my own custom characters. Sadly, as interesting as it looks, Sovereign Syndicate is nowhere close to being done. The latest estimate from the dev team is that it's still in the prototype phase. They're aiming for maybe the holidays in late 2024. So we won't be hearing much about that game for quite a while. Sliding on down the list, I'll give a quick shout out for Space Cats Tactics by Mitzi Games. Full disclosure, I actually heard about this game a while ago and just kind of ignored it. I do love cats, but this game just sounded too silly. I have since reevaluated it somewhat after learning that the lead developer is apparently the co-creator of FTL. I mean, I still think it sounds ridiculous, but I'm at least taking it slightly more seriously. From what I've gathered, it is essentially a turn-based tactical space battle game with crew management and a story about space cats. It's due out in spring of next year. I probably won't be doing any videos about it, but you know, I am keeping an eye on it. If it's even half as fun as FTL was, then it'll be a great way to kill some time. There is a prototype demo up on Steam, so feel free to go check that out, with full launch slated for spring of next year, so not that far off. And since we're already on the subject of ridiculous ideas, the next game I want to mention is Tactical Breach Wizards by Suspicious Developments. This one is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a turn-based tactical mashup of high fantasy and modern crime drama. The player takes control of a squad of elite law enforcement wizards with assault stabs and silenced wands, working to shut down back-alley alchemists who are flooding the city with cheap mana potions. It's a very tongue-in-cheek game focused on short, chaotic, turn-based scenarios where creative spell use and chain reactions is key. The overall scope of the game is fairly small. It's intended to be about 8 hours long by the developer's own estimate, but it honestly sounds like it'll be a hoot. No ETA on release, but they are currently doing closed playtesting over on Steam. And we're definitely running long now, but let's do one more. I would like to mention Yakuza Empire from Rock Game SA. I just found out about this one last week, and it does look pretty slick. It's a strategy sim with what looks to be a simplified turn-based combat, where the player is tasked with running a Yakuza gang in the neon-soaked 90s. I will say that I do find this one intriguing, especially for the distinctive side-scrolling style, that vertical slice presentation, and the 90s motif, of course. I love that stuff. It might actually be a little too violent for me. I've got a reasonably strong stomach, but this one does look like it might be a little too hardcore, with stuff like executions and torture. so that could easily end up limiting its overall appeal. Still, it does look interesting, so I figured it was worth a mention. Original release date estimate was late 2021, but I think it's pretty safe to say that's not happening. Maybe we'll see it pop up sometime in 2022. Hopefully it's good. At any rate, I think that's enough for now. We caught up on some channel news, talked about some future projects, and rambled about some other potentially interesting games. So I think we're just about ready to put a bow on this retrospective and call it wrapped. Oh, except for the whole special thanks segment, right. Well, obviously I'm thankful to y'all for continuing to watch the ramblings of an amateur content creator. While the YouTube payout isn't exactly phenomenal, it's still thanks to folks like you that I can make ends meet during current events. As always, I know it doesn't seem like much, but every time you watch or comment on one of my videos, or tap the various buttons that do the things, even the dislike button, it all does add up. One quick note there, though. I've actually been told that recently, the YouTube algorithm is apparently paying a lot more attention to which creators put out content that leads to chain viewing, watching more than one of a creator's videos back to back. Not sure how accurate that is, or how long it'll actually stay that way now that folks are talking about it, but it is a rather interesting claim. Regardless, thanks for your support. I'm glad you enjoy my videos, and hopefully you'll continue enjoying them as we all march into the new year. And of course, special thanks go out to the Raiders, the fine folks who help make these videos possible. I already name-dropped them earlier, but as aforementioned, they really do help keep the channel going, because without their more direct financial support, I'd have likely given up on this whole YouTube experiment by now. They help keep it just slightly more financially viable, and help keep my cats fed with the fanciest of feasts, and I really do appreciate their support. Like I said earlier, it's not just that they help me keep the lights on, but their support also lets me focus on projects that might be less viable for views, but which I still want to work on. If I were entirely reliant on YouTube's ad rev system, I'd be a lot less likely to run these long, ongoing series. It's a lot easier to maintain higher video engagement levels when you're constantly jumping from one game to another. That's why there are so many variety gamers on YouTube these days, as opposed to ones who are dedicated to niche, long-format series. So, that said, I'd like to give special thanks to all of the honorary raiders who are active between August and December, so mostly Q4. A little overlap, but we'll get that cleaned up next year. Alexander Hochbaum, Austin Fagan, Benjamin Gray, Bose77, Brad Quinn, C1S, Chronosaur, Commissar Moody, Comrade Robot, CRX-CRVS, Ego2, Ethan Vonderweed, Flamebeard, Gresham, ICU Uwu, Mark Giemza, Maximilian Monk, Misha, Neurolancer, Oil of Hope, Peter, Rob H., Roman Berger, Scott Brown, Sir Dialot, Steve Saxa, Vertigo 322, and Victoria Babenko. And extra special thanks to all the veteran raiders who were active during that same general time period. Adri Raven, Anachronian, Drakith, Erie V23, Glenn Jensen, James Tremere, Jeffrey McInnes, Lady Shayna, Laura and Mike, Leroy Nukinson, Lacknishender, Max Robespierre, Michael Bain, Yolo Conte, Nerd Prof, Nod Goblin Nico, OMG, Optimal 2, Oscar Van Vliet, Raximus Savage, Sensei Yums, Seth Cooper, Sean Orpin, Stoltz, Terry Williams, The Link King, The Book Thief, Thomas K. Arata, Trip Hop and Skip, and Woe77. Plus, of course, I should probably mention the rogues gallery of raider captains and raider lords that seem to have popped up as of late. Nine Knives, Revenant, Eloise, A Nerd in Warpaint, Antonio Hernandez, Dragon Matrix 7, Excelsior, Gottlieb, Kazorm, Lima, Nathan Welch Jr., Thomas Pietkowski, and Valenrook. Those folks have gone above and beyond in supporting the channel, and for that I will be eternally grateful. At least until they inevitably betray me, at which point my retribution will be swift and merciless, but hey, that's fine. It's all just part of being a raider. That said, if you would like to join the ignominious ranks of the Retcon Raiders, then feel free to check out the links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts down below. As always, this is a strictly amateur outfit. The money goes towards helping make ends meet and covers my overhead and keeps my cats fed during these tough times that we find ourselves in. Said support will net you my eternal appreciation, even after the aforementioned betrayal and/or vengeance. But more notably, it also gets you access to an assortment of rambling blog posts, special polls, shoutouts, and even occasional early access to my various video projects. I also just finally got around to linking my Patreon to my Discord server, so if you sign up, now you'll get to sport a fancy pants special color if you decide to slum it with the rest of us over on Discord. I'd actually like to get special icons and emotes done up at some point too, but that's something for future Retcon to worry about, maybe once the channel's gotten a bit bigger. Anyway, that concludes the obligatory "Please send me money" segment of the video. Thank goodness. So I think it's time we bring this train wreck to a merciful end. Thanks for your support, everyone. I do sincerely mean that. And despite all that plugging I just did for the Patreon, don't pledge unless you're really comfortable doing it. While I do certainly appreciate every bit of support that folks want to send my way, I by no means expect it. I'm honestly still just flabbergasted that there are so many people out there who enjoy listening to the increasingly mad ramblings of a toothless Florida man and his clouder of swamp cats. But hey, as long as you're still enjoying it, that's good enough for me. This is Retcon Raider, signing off. See you next time. Oh, and if you need to contact me for any reason, then feel free to leave a comment below, or you can toss me a line over on Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, or at my official email address. As always, links are in the description. Come on, Layla, let's go get you some food. And you too, Ellie, I see you. Hey, Kaiser.